Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today I have a special guest to introduce this very special project, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today I am thrilled to bring Jason to the channel. Jason is a Mi'kmaq person from Canada's East Coast, one of Canada's Indigenous nations. And a number of months ago, Jason's cousin Ben asked me if I'd be willing to look at some traditional designs and see if I could turn them into fabric and fabric art. And what an honor to be asked. But I wanted to bring Jason to the channel to explain the history and the origin of this first design.
So this first design is inspired by the traditional 8-point Mi'kmaq star. And this Mi'kmaq star is found, or a petroglyph version of this 8-point star is found in just outside of Bedford, Nova Scotia, in petroglyph form dating back to pre-contact times. So it's a very, as we can see, a very important and historical piece of iconography. And the 8-point star, as many people may see, contains 4 colors: white, yellow, red, black, and its shape is that of a cardinal point. So the 4 directions: north, east, south, and west. And these colors, these directions, are used also throughout many indigenous communities throughout North America. So it's a beautiful design. It's a classic and simple design, and it's a very important teaching tool.
And that's why the project is called Timeless Teachings. Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.
I've also designed another color option because I think this is still a beautiful design. And if you're not an Indigenous person, there's still an opportunity to make this really, really cool table runner. So let's dive in. These are the fabrics I'm going to use for this project. And these are a little different for me. I have started to use more and more pieces of bed sheets, believe it or not, that I find at the thrift store. So this red is a Tommy Hilfiger bed sheet that I picked up at the thrift store for about $6, $6.50 maybe. 100% cotton. I've learned the hard way. Always check the tags, and if there's no tags, leave it behind. But the red, nice, solid, really beautiful, thick, densely woven, 100% cotton. The black is regular fabric from the fabric store from my collection. The white, another cotton bed sheet from the thrift store. It is a beautiful, beautiful heavyweight cotton. I've used quite a lot of this already in the intertwined quilts, and it's really beautiful to work with, and it's a beautiful density. So I really like this white. Some yellow from my collection. And then for the background, I'm going to use this Dove Gray, also a bed sheet from the thrift store, 100% cotton. Irons up absolutely beautifully. And so I'm excited to get cutting on these pieces. The final squares in the quilt are going to be 3.5 inches. Sorry, the blocks are going to be 3.5 inches going into the quilt. So they'll be finished at 3 inches in the final project, which means to make half square triangles, I'm going to cut the squares at 4 inches. I have all the pieces cut, and I've decided to actually cut 2 quilts, 2 table toppers, table runners, because for each of these combinations of colors, I only need 1 half square triangle. But because I'm making it with this 2 at a time method, I'm going to end up with 2. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I just cut enough for 2 table runners, because I've got plenty of fabric, and that way I'll have 2. So why not? I've done a test block down here, my 4-inch blocks, making half square triangles 2 at a time, come up at 3.5 inches very nicely with just a little trim off the edge after sewing. So now I've got a lot of half square triangles to make, and then I will figure out from my original design on pre-quilt what size pieces I need to finish the background. I have all my half square triangles made for 2 table runners. I've got the four colors with the background. The background is the gray, yellow, black, red, and white. And then I have the mix of half square triangles to make my center pinwheel, which will then become the star points when I add the star legs with the background. So I'm going to start to lay this out, and then I need to calculate the spacing of the separators for the little arms that go to the left and right. And then I need to calculate what other background pieces I'm going to need in order to complete the table runner. A little bit of time has gone by since I first started making and filming this project, and I decided to make another table runner, yet another one, with this slightly darker gray background fabric. I think it's going to show off the white, especially, a little bit better than the lighter gray that I started with. So, and I also realized I didn't talk about how to make the 2 at a time half square triangles. If you're not familiar with this method, this is a 4-inch square because I want a 3.5-inch half square triangle. I drew a line diagonally down the center of my square, and then I sewed a 1/4 inch on either side of that line, on both sides of that line. So now I'm going to just take my cutter and I'm going to slice it down the center, and I will be able to get 2 half square triangles out of this process. They will square easily to 3.5 inches with almost no waste. And then when I put them into the final project, into the quilt, they will be 3 inches finished in the quilt. So um, the other ones are quilted, so you'll be able to see the finished final project when I finish this video, but I'm going to get the quilt top made for this darker gray background. So let's talk about the layout. Now I've got two versions to show you. The first is the Mi'kmaq Indigenous version, and then if you're not an Indigenous person but you still like the look of this pattern, let me show you a two color alternative that I think is a lot of fun. So I'm going to start, these were the 4-inch pieces we cut, made into half square triangles and squared up to 3.5 inches. So I'm going to start with my pinwheel, and this is just so challenging for me. I'm going to have the white pointing up this way, and we want to make this this diamond shape. And so these pieces go like this in order to get this chevron. And so then these, so we're not making a pinwheel per se in the middle. We want these colors to line up like this so that when we bring in their matching um, flying geese units, then we get the star emerging like this. All right. So this is the center star, which I think looks great. And then in order to get it to radiate, I wanted to create a little bit of space, and that's what these 2-inch by 6.5-inch pieces are for. And this creates just a little bit of space so that it looks like it just radiates a little bit. And these pieces go in here, and I've got 3 radiations, is that right? Going out the side, and then just one top and bottom. So I'm not sure if I can zoom out far enough to show you that, but you'll see that in the final, in the pattern, and in the, I don't know if I zoom it out a little bit. You can see all the junk in my sewing room. So that radiates out 3 that way. I'm going to put this like this and have like that. Yeah, it's a little hard. Let me see if I can move the camera a little bit. You see what I mean? And then I'm going to do the same with the black in this direction. And then the only other pieces that we need are the pieces that go into these voids that we're creating. So that's going off, kind of going off wildly in all directions. The final dimensions are in the pattern, but then I have these giant rectangles. They're about 8.5 by 17 inches, I think, and those go into these spaces. And then what I did was I tried to think of this almost in 3 rows, if you will. This middle section is 1 row. The white, the divider, the white, and those 2 long gray pieces are the top row. And then same thing down here with the red. That's the third row. So what I'm going to do, and these will fit once you get your seam allowances all sewn together. Let me just throw that in there. So I'm going to sew this flying goose unit with the divider and the other one. That's going to be one unit once that all gets sewn together. And then I'm going to add those two, and that's going to be the first row. Then I'm going to sew all of these little pieces together all the way along here. That's going to be my middle row. And the same thing for the bottom. I'm going to sew these red pieces with the divider and the big pieces together, and that becomes the third row. So that's how you sew this table runner together. Super simple. Not very many pieces in the end, but I think the impact is really cool. But maybe this isn't your colorway. Maybe this isn't something that you or your family identify with. So let me show you an alternative. I'm just going to gather this all up and show you the other pieces. This blue and white colorway I thought would be really, really cool. So instead of the half square triangles that go into the middle, so if you recall on the indigenous piece, these four pieces come together like this to make the center piece. We don't need to do that on this two color option. So this is a 6.5-inch square of white. And I'm going to add, these were my half square triangles that I've sewn down the middle. I always press my seams open if you know me. And so this is actually really quite simple. We're just going to make that 8-pointed star in the middle of this piece, like so. And then just like the other one, I have these little dividers in blue, and I'm just going to have my, I don't know, what is this, a winter star, a snowflake. I'm just going to have this radiate out in this direction with the blue and white double colorway. Assembly is going to be the same way. I'm going to put 3 out in that direction. I'm going to add 1 top and bottom here like this. I think this is going to look really, really fun. It can be very winter, it could be very Christmassy, or it could just be a blue and white star. Maybe you want to make it red and white. Maybe you want to make it yellow and white. There's all kinds of different options here. And then I have these large blue pieces to fill in these corner spaces. So I think this is a great alternative if you're looking for a different colorway. My original inspiration was that Mi'kmaq star, but this I think is a really cool alternative. And look at that glorious blue. I just think it's so stunning. This is a piece of fabric. If you saw my upcycle recycle video, this is a piece of fabric I got at Eco Equitable, and it's quite heavy. It's probably pushing a cotton canvas, but I just love the way that this looks. And I think this 2-color option is going to look really, really good as well. I've got my 3 rows sewn together. You can see I started with the half square triangles in the center here to get my chevron shapes, and then the flying goose units, adding those spacers and then sewing it all together. I pressed the seams in the center open, but then once I added the flying geese units, I pressed those seams sort of away from the bulk, the way they naturally wanted to lay down. And then the same for the white and the red. I pressed the seams in the direction they wanted to go once the spacers were there, pressed these seams here towards the outside so that these seams which are pressed towards the inside, so this will all nest nicely when I sew these 3 pieces together. So it's as simple as that. Let me quickly show you the blue because it's also looking really, really good. Pressed exactly the same way, sewn together exactly the same way. And so that is going to be the blue one, which I think is going to look really smart. This is just that big square as we talked about with the radiating points coming off on either direction. So I'm going to sew these together and start to think about quilting strategies, and then we're going to wrap up this project. And this is the final table runner with the star points radiating out in all directions, but particularly into the past and into the future. To machine quilt it, I just did a little bit of echo quilting around all of the shapes and then put in some straight lines into those blank spaces just to fill in the quilt. I wanted to keep it really modern. Normally I do an all over free motion design, but I just didn't think that would suit this project, so stuck with the straight line quilting using my walking foot. And this is the one on the darker gray background, which I really like. I'm really glad I went with the darker gray. The lighter grays are still nice, but just finished this one last night, just in time to sneak a little preview into the video. Let me zoom in on the quilting so you can see it. Thank you so much for watching this video on the Timeless Teachings Table Runner. Thank you, Jason, for sharing the background and the history of this design. And thank you to Ben, of course, for inviting me to take this cultural element and try to turn it into fabric and a fabric design. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.